Welcome to The Blitz, a podcast from Complementarianism Church. The Blitz is all about tackling tough topics head-on at full speed. Are you ready? Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night, good whatever time it happens to be that you are listening to this podcast. My name is John, lead pastor of Complementarianism Church, and I will be your host today. Today, we are going to be asking a question that may sound silly to you or confusing, but nevertheless, it's an important thing for us to explore. And that question is this: is egalitarianism the gateway drug to transgenderism? Right? Is egalitarianism the gateway drug to transgenderism? And before we unpack that, we need to do a little bit of defining of terms. Historically, there are generally two ways in church history that Christians have thought about gender and the distinction and the roles of men and women in the church. The first is called Complementarianism, and that is the idea that men and women complement each other in their roles. And the other is Egalitarianism, and that is the idea that men and women are equally capable of doing every role within the church. There is no distinction between the genders as it comes to function in the church. So we're going to unpack this a little bit, and it'll be helpful for us to just acknowledge two foundational scriptures that should shape our thinking and our beliefs regarding this. The first one is Genesis 1. We get it right out of the gate as we hear about God creating this world. The climax of creation is God creating human beings in his own image. And in Genesis 1, verse 27, it says, "So God created man in his own image," that is humanity. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So from this verse, we can clearly deduce the following things. Men and women are created in the image of God, are a reflection of his infinite value, worth, and glory. And as a consequence of that, men and women both have dignity and value and worth because they are made in the image of God. Men reflect the image of God, made in the image of God. Women reflect the image of God, are made in the image of God. Males created to reflect God's glory in a unique way. Females created to reflect God's glory in a unique way. There is no discussion, no debate as to whether or not a male or a female has more or less value than the other gender. Both men and women are created in God's glory, and that is the foundation and the basis of their equal dignity, value, and glory. So right out of the gate, male and femaleness are things that God creates, things that in his wisdom he bestows. Maleness is a gift that God bestows. Femaleness is a gift that God bestows. Each of them reflecting God's glory, each gender, male and female, possessing intrinsic value, inescapable value, because both being made by God. And so the value of a male and the value of a female is derived from the reality that they are made by God. God created them. There is no debate there, and there is no room biblically to explore or suggest that one gender has more value than the other gender. So in Genesis 1, very early on, as we are looking at creation, we see God as the creator of all things, the creator of men and the creator of women who are made in his image. He is their creator, and consequently, they have intrinsic value and worth. There's no debate over that. Where this issue can get dicey is when specifically it comes to the roles of men and women in the church. Do men and women, are they called by God to perform the same roles in the church, or does God have unique roles for men and women in the church? So you may be wishing, that somebody had potentially written about this, inspired of the Holy Spirit. Well, wish no more. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to 1 Timothy, a pastor, leader of the church in Ephesus, dealing with a bunch of issues, trying to establish not just good and pure doctrine, but also pure order, and that involves clarity regarding men and women in the church of Ephesus. The Apostle Paul writes to him, and in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 12 through 13, it says this: I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet, that is, to learn in silence. For Adam was formed first, and then Eve. Now, it's important to understand that 1 Timothy 2, Paul is talking about the church gathered. What happens when the people of God gather corporately for worship. And in that context, the Apostle Paul clearly says, I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. And there is some confusion, some debate over what that authority is referring to, but the text seems to make it very, very clear, because the very next thing that the Apostle Paul talks about is eldership. And so it seems to be that he is discussing the role of elders within the church. So the woman is not to teach or exercise authority over a man. And then there's a reason for this. And so often when people get into these discussions and debates on this issue, what they will say is that Paul is just capitulating or kind of giving in to the cultural norm. So there is an established cultural norm in Ephesus, and that would have been true for all of the Roman Empire, that men should lead in a unique way. And so Paul is just allowing for that in the church because that's just the way the culture is, and Paul doesn't want to disrupt the culture. However, you really have a hard time sustaining an argument that Paul doesn't want to disrupt the culture, where Paul goes from city to city preaching the gospel. He gets beat up. He gets thrown out of the city. He's ultimately going to lose his head over this thing. There's nothing about Paul that says that he is really, really concerned about not ruffling feathers per se. And in fact, the text in 1 Timothy chapter 2 makes this very, very clear. Because after he speaks of the issue of women not teaching in an authoritative way in the context of the church, he then says in verse 13, "For," and that's Paul's way of saying this is why this is the case. For Adam was formed first and then Eve. Why is it that a woman was not supposed to teach or exercise authority, but rather the men were supposed to do that in the church? Why is that? His answer is creation, not culture. Paul does not look at the culture and say, hey, we need to mimic what's happening here. Paul goes back to creation, back to the order, back to Genesis, and he says God created Adam first and then Eve. That order speaks to issues of headship and responsibility, and it's because of the order in creation that teaching in an authoritative way in the church is to be reserved only for biblically qualified men. Now, to kind of bolster this argument, literally the next thing that Paul says in this letter is chapter 3, verses 1 through 2. The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, that is also translated elder, if anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach. And then, hold on, the husband of one wife. So Paul is giving the qualifications of the elders who oversee the church, whose job is to instruct in doctrine, to exercise church authority, to guard the doctrinal purity of the church. That office is reserved for men, biblically qualified men. And then Paul goes into the qualifications of an elder. What does an elder look like? But he says that he must be above reproach, the husband of one wife. So in 1 Timothy, it seems very, very clear that while Paul is going to affirm men and women made in the image of God are equal in terms of value and dignity because they're made by God, God has made men and women for different roles, for different functions. The one function, the one office in the church, which would be excluded, or which would exclude women from it, would simply be the office of elder or pastor or overseer. There are some denominations who argue that the office of deacon also excludes women from serving. I personally do not believe that. I don't see that in the text, but I do clearly see that this issue of exercising authority and teaching, which is the primary responsibility of the elders, that is set aside specifically for biblically qualified men. And so what's happening, what we see, I think, in 1 Timothy is complementarianism. Men and women made in the image of God with value, dignity, worth, and honor. And yet there is a distinction in the roles. God made men to function in a unique way, and God made women to function in a different, unique way. Those ways complement each other, and together, through that complementing of those roles, there is a blessing for all, a blessing for the church. There's a blessing in the home for a husband and wife that complement each other. This is part of God's brilliant design. And so in complementarianism, you do have the affirmation, this clear affirmation of the dignity, value, and worth of a woman and men, and also this distinction that says that the differences between male and female, man and women, is not just biology. God actually made them for different things. And each thing that God made them for is good, but they're not interchangeable. They're not interchangeable. They complement one another. So in a nutshell, that's complementarianism. And on the flip side of that is egalitarianism. Now, an egalitarian is going to have to dismiss somehow 1 Timothy 2, I think, is going to have to do some gymnastics there to make it say something that I don't think it makes, that it says. But at the end of the day, the argument is that in the context of a church, a woman, a female, is able to do, is qualified to do biblically everything that a man can do, meaning in an egalitarian type of church, you're going to have female pastors, you can have female elders, that highest level of authority, the overseeing responsibility would be open both to men and women. The pulpit is for men and women. There is absolutely no gender distinction when it comes to local ministry, leadership in the church. And so here's where I'm going to connect this to transgenderism, because in complementarianism, we believe that the differences between men and women are not just biological, right? Yes, they are biological. There are biological distinctions between a male and a female, but there are also distinctions in terms of role. In egalitarianism, the distinction is only biological and is quite inconsequential, because at the end of the day, the work of a man and the work of a woman is absolutely interchangeable. When it comes to the role of elder, a man can do it, a woman can do it, it makes no difference. The role of authoritative teaching in the church, a man can do it, a woman can do it. The role of pastor, a man can do it, a woman can do it, it makes no difference. The biological gender has no bearing on function, okay? That is a foundational belief to egalitarianism. And here's what I want to say, okay? And I know some of you are going to disagree with this, so let me know. But here's the thing. If you say that biological gender has no consequence on function, that apart from biologically being distinct, men and women can do exactly the same things, you are then therefore allowing for that ideology to give birth, if you will, to transgenderism. That anything a man can do, a woman can do, and anything a woman can do, a man can do. When you separate and you take away a functional distinction between men and women, what you're saying is that the difference is inconsequential. The difference between male and female is inconsequential. It is so inconsequential that a man can choose to become a woman and a woman can choose to become a man, because those biological realities don't matter. They simply do not matter. Egalitarianism must affirm the biological differences between men and women do not matter in terms of what men and women can do. If that is true, and you take that ideology all the way to the end, right? When you have an idea and you have a belief, you have to think it all the way through, all the way to the end. And if biology is an inconsequential distinction between men and women, and essentially men and women can do the exact same things, created to do the same things, created to function in the exact same way, there is no distinction there. If that is actually the case, then what you end up when that little seed of ideology goes into the ground and it is watered and it grows up and it bears fruit, the fruit that ultimately is going to bear is what we are currently seeing in our culture, and that is transgenderism. Now, it's really interesting, something I'm just thinking of while we're talking here. Abraham Kuyper, there's a book that has a collection of lectures that he gave in the United States at the late 1800s. I think it was at Yale or something like that. And he came over and he made this comment in, I think it was like 1892. And what he was seeing in the culture at that point was that modernism was bent on removing all distinctions, right? Modernism was bent and committed on removing all distinctions. And what he said at that point is that modernism would not quit until it had removed every distinction, including the distinction between man and woman. Now, he said that some 130 years ago. He saw it because he understood that the seed of egalitarianism, that ideology, that idea that says there is really no distinction between men and women, when you tease that all the way out, what you end up with is a man who can decide to become a woman, or a woman who can decide to become a man, because the distinction between the genders is inconsequential and it can be spanned by simply choosing an identity. So it's my argument, right? It's my position that egalitarianism, when it is taken to its logical conclusion, must produce transgenderism. Now, I am not saying that every person, every Christian, every pastor, every denomination that holds to an egalitarian view of gender, I'm not saying that they are for transgenderism. Okay, I'm not making that argument. What I'm saying is that the ideology that supports egalitarianism, the fundamental beliefs that you must hold to, what you must accept to embrace egalitarianism, those commitments in the end will produce what we are currently seeing, which is transgenderism. And here is really what the only solution to this problem, okay? We must accept our gender as a gift from God. God is a good God. He is a wise God. He made us distinct from all the rest of creation. He made us distinct from all the rest of the animals. He has bestowed his image upon us and no other part of creation. And part of God bestowing his image on us is creating us male or creating us female. And when we worship God and we trust in God, we can accept and embrace our gender as a gift from him. We can do that by faith, even when we have feelings, genuine feelings inside us that are in conflict with our God-given gender. We can look to God and know God does not make mistakes. God makes good things. He gives good gifts. And the gift of maleness or the gift of femaleness that he has given to an individual, that is a good gift. Transgenderism is a rejection of the image of God. It is a rejection of the gift of gender that God has bestowed. And transgenderism is almost the peak of rebellion against God, because rather than being created in the image of the triune God, transgenderism is our attempt to create us in our own image. It is to remove the distinction between God, the creator, and human beings, his creation. So in the end, I believe egalitarianism, when it is worked out completely to its fullest extent, it is going to produce the mess that we are currently seeing in our world, and that is massive confusion, massive hurt and harm being done to individuals, and the transgenderism movement as it is unfolding before us. So those are my thoughts on it. Feel free to push back. I'd really ask you to think about what I'm trying to suggest here, what I'm trying to point out. Ideas have consequence. You got to think about those things. Would love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, it's John here on the Blitz. Take care.